Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The hover scooter's engine coughed like a dying cat with bronchitis. Edward Ramirez wiped his greasy hands on an even greasier rag and gave the engine block a solid whack with his wrench. The coughing stopped. The Verdal customer's photosynthetic skin flickered from worried orange to relieved green. How? The Verdal's voice carried the distinctive wheeze of his species. Our diagnostics showed 17 different failure points. Your diagnostics overthink. Edward spun the wrench between his fingers, a habit from his pit crew days. 9 times out of 10, it's just a loose coupling. The vibration makes your fancy sensors think the whole system's failing. He gestured at the wall behind him, where a faded Daytona 500 poster hung between a collection of mismatched wrenches. Back on Earth, we had a saying, if you can't fix it with duct tape, you're not using enough duct tape. The Verdal's skin shifted to confused yellow. But you didn't use any adhesive strips. It's a metaphor. That'll be 40 credits. After the Verdal left, Edward returned to rebuilding a combustion engine nobody on Verdania Prime would ever need. The familiar work helped him not think about things, like how he'd ended up 40 light-years from Earth, fixing alien appliances instead of managing a NASCAR pit crew. Like how Travis would still be alive if Edward had caught that loose lug nut during inspection. A soft, scraping sound from outside made him look up, like something being dragged across metal, probably just the local kids playing with scrap again. But when he glanced down, he saw it, a droplet of purple liquid on his workshop floor, still wet, gleaming under the industrial lights, then another, and another, leading toward the back alley. Edward grabbed a shop towel and followed the trail. The drops grew larger, more frequent. His NASCAR instincts kicked in. Somebody was hurt, losing fluid fast. In racing, you had maybe seconds to prevent disaster. Behind the recycling containers, wedged between rusted metal sheets and old hoverbike frames, he found her, a Zephyrian child, maybe 6 years old, her purple skin pale and clammy. Her right leg ended in a mess of makeshift bandages just below the knee, purple blood seeping through what looked like expensive fabric. A broken crutch, just a rusted pipe wrapped in rags, lay beside her. Holy hell. Edward dropped to his knees. The kid's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. When he touched her shoulder, those eyes snapped open, violet irises with silver flecks, wide with terror. Hey, easy. He kept his voice low, the same tone he'd used with his sister's kids back on Earth. I'm not gonna hurt you. Name's Eddie. I fix things. He pointed to his shop's back door. Got a first aid kit inside. Maybe some juice boxes if you're into that ancient Earth technology. The girl tried to scramble backward but gasped when she moved her injured leg. Her hand clutched something under her torn cloak, something that caught the light with a metallic gleam. Okay. You don't have to move. Edward held up both hands. But that leg needs attention. I can call a medical transport. The girl's eyes went wider. She shook her head violently. No doctors. Yeah, I get that. Doctors ask questions. Edward studied her face. Despite the dirt and tear tracks, her features had that distinctive Zephyrian symmetry, almost too perfect to be real. How about this? I carry you inside, clean that up myself. No questions, no authorities. Deal? She stared at him for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Edward scooped her up carefully. She weighed almost nothing, her bones burred hollow like all Zephyrians. As he carried her through his shop's back door, she tucked her face against his shoulder, and he felt her trembling. Medical kits in the bathroom, he said, setting her on his workbench after clearing away carburetors and circuit boards. This might sting a bit. You know what else stings? Bees. But they make honey, so we forgive them. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Edward worked in silence, cutting away the blood-soaked bandages. The wound was old, maybe a few weeks, but she'd torn it open again recently. The crudeness of the amputation made his stomach turn. This wasn't surgical. This was battlefield medicine, or worse. "You've been walking on this?" He applied antiseptic foam, noting how she bit her lip but didn't cry out. "That's either brave or stupid. Maybe both." As he worked, he noticed things. The quality of her torn cloak. The fabric had that shimmer that meant it cost more than his shop made in a year. Her hands, soft and uncalloused except for fresh scrapes. The way she held herself, spine straight despite the pain, like someone had drilled posture into her since birth. There. He secured the last of the fresh bandages. "That'll hold for now, but you need proper medical attention. That crutch of yours is garbage. No wonder you fell." He rummaged through his scrap pile. "Give me 20 minutes. I'll make you something better." The girl watched him work, her eyes tracking every movement as he welded aluminum pipes together, added foam padding from an old pilot seat, adjusted the height 3 times until it was perfect. When he handed it to her, she ran her fingers over it like it was made of gold. "Thank you," she whispered. Edward nearly dropped his welding torch. That wasn't street dialect. That was pure High Zephyrian, the kind they spoke in the floating palaces of the upper tier. "You're welcome," he said carefully. "You got somewhere to go?" She nodded quickly, sliding off the workbench. The new crutch took her weight easily. She limped toward the door, then paused, looking back at him with those striking violet eyes. Then she was gone. Edward stood there for a moment, staring at the purple bloodstains on his workbench. He'd seen a lot of injured kids in the lower district, but none with that bearing, that accent. He moved to the security terminal he'd installed after someone tried to steal his antique socket wrench set. The cameras were old, barely functional, but they'd caught something. He rewound the footage. There, the girl approaching his shop. But she hadn't come from the street. She'd emerged from a maintenance hatch that led to the old service tunnels. Edward checked the timestamp. 3 hours ago. He switched to another camera, one that covered the front of his shop. The same girl sitting behind a stack of crates, watching him through the window as he worked on an engine. He fast-forwarded. She stayed for 2 hours, perfectly still except for her hands, which mimicked his movements in the air. What the hell? Edward scrolled back further. A week ago. There she was again. 2 weeks, a month, 3 months. Different positions, different hiding spots, but always watching. Some days she fell trying to navigate the debris with that makeshift crutch. One recording showed her dragging herself behind cover when her crutch broke completely. 3 months. This kid had been watching him for 3 months, traveling who knows how far on one leg and garbage for support. The next day, Edward kept the shop door open and worked on projects near the window. Sure enough, he caught movement in his peripheral vision, purple skin behind the recycling unit. He pretended not to notice but left a sandwich and a juice box on a crate within easy reach. 20 minutes later, both were gone. This continued for 3 days. Food left out, food disappearing. On the 4th day, he decided to be more direct. "You know," he said loudly while adjusting a manifold, "this would be easier if you just came inside. The view's better, and I've got chairs that actually have cushions." Silence. Then, slowly, the girl emerged. She moved carefully on the crutch he'd made, each step deliberate. When she reached the doorway, she stopped. "I don't want to bother you," she said in that same formal dialect. "Kid, I talk to myself half the day. Company would be an improvement." He gestured to a stool near his workbench. "Besides, you've been studying my technique for months. Might as well get a closer look." She hesitated, then made her way to the stool. Up close in better light, Edward could see more details. The faint shimmer in her purple skin that meant high caste genetics. The way her clothes, despite being torn and dirty, were cut with precision no lower district tailor could manage. "So," he said, returning to his work, "you gonna tell me your name, or should I just call you Purple Shadow?" "You can call me," she paused, "Leah." Not her real name, obviously, but Edward didn't push. "Okay, Leah, you want to tell me why you've been watching me work?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "You fix broken things, but you don't just replace them. You make them work differently." She gestured at his wall of repaired items. "That heating unit, it's Korthak's design, but you've added human components. It works better now." "You can tell that just by looking?" She nodded. "I understand machines. Before—" She cut herself off, her hand moving unconsciously to where her leg ended. "I used to study engineering." "Used to? You're what, 6, 7? 6, her voice dropped. "But I can't anymore. Broken things shouldn't touch tools of creation." Edward set down his wrench. "Who told you that crap?" She flinched at his tone. "It's the law. The imperfect cannot create, only destroy." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and I once watched a guy try to change oil with the engine running." Edward pulled up another stool. "Look, I don't know what kind of backwards." He stopped, studying her face. The way she held herself like the world was watching. The formal dialect, the expensive clothes. He'd been cleaning her cloak earlier, trying to get the blood out when something had fallen from an inner pocket. A medallion he'd quickly shoved back, pretending he hadn't seen it. But he had seen it. The royal seal of House Viridian. "Leah," he said carefully, "what's your real name?" She went very still. "Does it matter?" "Not to me, but somebody's probably looking for you." Her laugh was bitter, too old for her years. "No, nobody looks for broken things." Before Edward could respond, his shop's proximity alarm chimed. 3 hover vehicles had just entered the district's airspace, sleek, official, the kind that never came to the lower tier unless something was seriously wrong. The girl, Leah, went rigid. "I should go." "Back door," Edward said quickly. "Service tunnels 50 meters south. Go." But it was too late. The shop's front door opened and a woman entered who made the air itself seem to stand at attention. Purple skin a shade deeper than the girl's, silver hair that moved like liquid mercury, wearing a simple black outfit that probably cost more than Edward's entire building. 2 guards flanked her, but she raised a hand and they stayed by the door. The woman's eyes, exact copies of the girl's down to the silver flecks, found the child immediately. "Ophelia," she said quietly, "it's time to come home." The girl, Ophelia apparently, stood from the stool, chin raised despite the tears starting to run down her face. "I'm not your daughter anymore, remember? You said so yourself. The dead have no children." Edward looked between them. Mother and daughter, obviously. The resemblance was too strong, but the distance between them might as well have been light years. "I came to bring you back," the woman said. Her voice never wavered, but Edward caught something in her eyes, a flash of pain, quickly suppressed. "To lock me in the recovery wing again? To pretend I don't exist until after the ceremony?" Ophelia's knuckles were white on her crutch. "I'd rather stay here." "With a human mechanic? In this?" The woman's gaze swept the shop, taking in the oil stains, the scattered tools, the NASCAR posters. "Establishment?" "Hey," Edward interjected. "This establishment has working heat and all the juice boxes a kid could want. Plus, I don't tell her she's broken." The woman's attention snapped to him. "You don't know what you're interfering with." "I know a kid who needs help when I see one." Edward stepped partially in front of Ophelia. "And I know something about losing parts of yourself. Difference is, I learned you can build something new with what's left. Touching, but irrelevant." The woman straightened. "Zephyrian law is clear. The imperfect cannot rule. In 2 weeks, the ceremony of inheritance will name a new heir. Ophelia will be cared for, given comfort, but she cannot be what she was meant to be. Because she's missing a leg? That's insane. That's our way. The woman's voice cracked slightly on the last word. She composed herself immediately. Ophelia, please, come home. Why? Ophelia asked. You haven't looked at me in a year, haven't touched me since. She gestured at her leg. Since this happened, I'm already dead to you. The woman flinched as if slapped. That's not, I can't. She stopped, took a breath. The law. Screw your law, Edward said. No offense, Your Majesty, or whatever, but any law that throws away a kid because she's not physically perfect is garbage. The woman's eyes narrowed. You know who I am? Lucky guess. The whole royal bearing, perfect bone structure, guards that look like they could bench press my shop, kind of gives it away. He gestured at Ophelia. Plus, she's got your eyes. Then you know interfering with royal affairs is punishable. By death, probably. Everything's punishable by death with you people. Edward shrugged. Look, Your Majesty, Kalira, she said unexpectedly. My name is Kalira. Okay, Kalira. Your daughter's been coming here for 3 months. 3 months of crawling through service tunnels, falling, getting back up, just to watch me fix things. You know why? Kalira said nothing. Because I treat her like a person, not a tragedy. Because when she's here, she can just be a kid who likes machines. Edward picked up a wrench, spinning it absently. You say she can't be what she was meant to be, but maybe she's becoming something else, something better. Better? Kalira's voice was ice. She was to be queen, to lead our people into a new age. Now she can barely walk. Because you gave up on her. The words exploded out of Edward before he could stop them. She's got a crap crutch and old bandages because nobody thought she was worth proper medical care anymore. Our physicians tried everything. Your physicians think like Zephyrians. Edward set down the wrench, an idea forming. Look, you've got 2 weeks until this ceremony, right? Give me 1 week. Let me try something. Try what? A prosthetic, a real one, not whatever medieval stuff your doctors probably attempted. Kalira's laugh was bitter. Our technology is centuries ahead of Earth's. In some ways, sure. But humans, we've been replacing parts of ourselves since we figured out how to sharpen sticks. We know prosthetics. We know adaptation. He looked at Ophelia. I can build her something that'll let her walk, maybe even run. Impossible. The neural connections are different for Zephyrians, yeah, but not incompatible. I've been studying your tech for 2 years, fixing it, modifying it. Edward moved to his workbench, pulling out sketches he'd made while repairing various alien devices. Your bioelectric fields are actually more conductive than human nervous systems. If anything, a prosthetic would work better for her than for us. Kalira stared at the sketches. You've thought about this. Started the night I met her. Couldn't help it. It's how my brain works. See a problem, find a solution. And if you fail? Edward looked at Ophelia, who was watching him with those violet eyes full of something he hadn't seen before. Hope. Then at least someone tried. Kalira stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in those violet eyes. Then she turned to her daughter. 1 week. If this human fails, you return to the palace. No arguments. And if he succeeds, Ophelia asked, her voice small but steady, then we'll see what the council makes of a mechanical leg. Kalira's tone suggested she already knew what they'd make of it. Nothing good. She moved toward the door, then paused. I'll send proper medical supplies. And, she hesitated, I'll return tomorrow to observe. After she left, Edward found Ophelia crying silently on the stool, tears fizzing against her purple skin like drops of champagne. Hey, none of that. He handed her a relatively clean rag. We've got work to do. First rule of human engineering, when in doubt, raid everything. The next morning, Edward had Ophelia manning the shop's door while he dismantled a pizza delivery drone that had crashed 6 months ago. Its gyroscopic stabilizer was still intact, perfect for balance control. "Why pizza?" Ophelia asked, sorting screws by size without being asked. Her small fingers moved with surprising dexterity. "Because humans will find a way to deliver pizza anywhere. Mars colony? Pizza in 30 minutes. Bottom of the ocean? Pizza in a submarine. It's basically our greatest achievement as a species." He extracted the stabilizer carefully. "See this? It'll help you compensate for uneven terrain. Your planet's gravity is about 80% of Earth's, so we need to account for that." "You've thought about this a lot." "Couldn't sleep last night. My brain does that. Gets a problem and won't let go." He set the gyroscope aside and moved to an old gaming chair he'd bought from a departing human trader. "This has haptic feedback sensors. They'll translate pressure into signals your brain can interpret." Ophelia watched him work, then quietly asked, "Do you think I'm broken?" Edward's hand stilled. He set down his tools and crouched to her eye level. "You want the truth? You're missing a leg. That's not broken. That's just different. Broken would be giving up. Broken would be accepting what everyone tells you about yourself." He tapped her forehead gently. "Everything that makes you, you is still in there. We're just building you better wheels." She managed a wobbly smile. "That's a terrible metaphor. I'm a mechanic, not a poet." The workshop door chimed. Kalira entered, this time alone, wearing plain clothes that still managed to look regal. She carried a medical case that probably cost more than Edward's annual income. "You came back," Ophelia said, surprise evident in her voice. "I said I would observe." Kalira set down the case, her movements careful, controlled. She hadn't looked directly at her daughter yet. "I brought neural interface patches. Our technology, but you might find them useful." Edward opened the case, whistling low. "This is military-grade stuff. How'd you— Never mind, Queen, right?" He held up a translucent patch. "These could work, if we modify the connection points." He started sketching, talking half to himself. Kalira moved closer to see, close enough that he caught her scent, something like ozone and wildflowers. Their shoulders almost touched. "Your electromagnetic fields," he said, forcing himself to focus. "They're generated by cellular alignment, right? What if instead of trying to match that perfectly, we create a complementary field, like harmony instead of unison?" Kalira's eyes widened slightly. "That's actually brilliant. Our physicians always tried to replicate exactly, but harmonics could work better." "Mom knows everything about biofields," Ophelia piped up. "She wrote the definitive text when she was younger." Kalira's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago." "Not that long," Edward said, glancing at her. "What are you, 35? 38. She seemed surprised she'd answered. "So you were, 20 when you wrote a definitive scientific text? That's impressive." "I was motivated." Her hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen. "I wanted to understand why some pregnancies failed, the biofield disruptions during gestation." Edward caught the gesture, filed it away. "Did you figure it out?" "Eventually. Too late for—" She cut herself off, but her gaze flickered to Ophelia. "It doesn't matter now." The pieces clicked in Edward's mind. Miscarriages. Maybe multiple ones before Ophelia. It explained the fierce protectiveness, the devastating distance when her only successful child was maimed. They worked in relative silence for 2 hours, Edward shaping metal while Kalira provided calculations for field harmonics. Ophelia helped where she could, fetching tools, organizing components. It felt almost domestic. "You're teaching her to use tools," Kalira observed, watching Ophelia operate a small welding torch under Edward's supervision. "She's got good hands, steady. Plus, she already knows the theory better than most engineers I've met." Our law forbids. Your law's stupid. Edward didn't look up from his work. No offense. You say that a lot. No offense before saying something offensive. Would you prefer I lie? I'd prefer you show proper respect. Respect is earned, not inherited. He did look up then, meeting her gaze. You want me to bow and scrape because you've got a title? Or you want me to build your daughter a leg that actually works? They stared at each other. The air between them crackled with something that wasn't quite hostility. Mom, Ophelia said carefully, maybe you could help with the neural mapping? You know my patterns better than anyone. It was a peace offering and smart. Kalira's expression softened marginally. Yes, I could do that. The next 3 days fell into a routine. Edward and Ophelia would start early, sorting components and building the prosthetics frame. Kalira would arrive mid-morning, always with some excuse, bringing supplies, checking progress, ensuring proper protocols. She'd stay later each day. On the 4th day, she arrived to find Edward and Ophelia covered in oil, both laughing hysterically. What happened? She demanded. Eddie tried to demonstrate how the knee joint works, Ophelia gasped between giggles. But he used too much hydraulic fluid and she dissolved into laughter again. It's not that funny, Edward protested, wiping oil from his face, which only smeared it worse. You look like you wrestled a tar pit, Ophelia managed. Kalira's lips twitched. Then, to Edward's amazement, she actually laughed. Not a polite royal chuckle, but a real laugh that transformed her face. You have oil in your hair, she told Edward. It's sticking up. He ran a hand through his hair, making it worse. Great. Now I look like I stuck my finger in a socket. I don't know what that means, but yes, probably. They cleaned up, and the atmosphere had shifted, lighter somehow. As they returned to work, Kalira began talking more freely. The biofields aren't just for telekinesis, she explained, helping Edward calibrate sensors. They're how we sense the world. Ophelia hasn't been able to feel properly since she stopped. Since I lost my leg, Ophelia finished quietly. It's okay, Mom. You can say it. Kalira's hand trembled slightly. Since the amputation, it's like losing one of your senses. We'll fix that, Edward said with more confidence than he felt. The haptic feedback should help. And look. He showed them his latest modification. I've added electromagnetic pulse generators at key points. They'll create a field that meshes with your natural one. Like a harmony, Ophelia said, understanding immediately. Exactly. You're going to be like a cyborg princess. How cool is that? What's a cyborg? Half machine, half person, all awesome. Kalira shook her head but smiled slightly. Your enthusiasm is infectious, like a disease but more fun. That night, Kalira stayed late. Ophelia had fallen asleep on the shop's battered couch, exhausted from the day's work. Edward covered her with his jacket, then returned to fine-tuning the prosthetic's knee joint. She hasn't slept that peacefully in a year, Kalira said softly, watching her daughter. Kids are resilient. Give them hope, and they'll run with it. And if this doesn't work, if I've given her hope for nothing? Edward looked up from his work. Then at least she had a week of feeling like she mattered. Kalira was quiet for a moment. Then, her father would have liked you. Yeah? He appreciated directness and terrible jokes. She moved closer, ostensibly to observe his work. He died 3 years ago. Border skirmish with House Crimson that escalated into war. I'm sorry. He was trying to negotiate peace. They shot him during the talks. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the workbench. The same faction that would later target Ophelia. They knew she was all I had left. Edward set down his tools. My racing partner, Travis, we'd been friends since we were kids. I was crew chief, he was driver, best team in NASCAR's amateur league. He picked up the small welding torch, turning it in his hands. I missed a loose lug nut during inspection. Wheel came off at 180 miles per hour. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? It was my job to check, my responsibility. He met her eyes. Sometimes I think I came out here to get as far from racing as possible. Ended up on an alien planet fixing hover scooters. Travis would have laughed his ass off. Is that why you're helping Ophelia? Guilt? Maybe at first. Now? He glanced at the sleeping girl. Now she's just my kid. Is that weird? Yes. Kalira's expression was unreadable, but I understand it. Their hands were close on the workbench. Edward was acutely aware of every inch between them. Kalira seemed to realize it too, pulling back slightly. I should go, she said. You could stay. Order some food. Let Ophelia sleep a bit longer before moving her. She hesitated, then nodded. All right. They ate terrible takeout from the one human restaurant in the district, talking about anything except the prosthetic or the upcoming ceremony. Edward learned that Kalira had wanted to be an engineer before royal duties consumed her life. Kalira learned that Edward could play guitar badly and sing worse. You're not what I expected, she admitted as they cleaned up. What did you expect? Someone less. Humans have a reputation for being crude, simplistic. We are. But we're also stubborn as hell and creatively stupid. He grinned. It's a winning combination. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Modesty isn't a human trait, I see. Nope, we're terrible at it. Ophelia stirred on the couch. Kalira moved to her immediately, then stopped, her hand hovering inches from her daughter's head. It's okay, Edward said quietly. She won't break. Kalira's hand trembled as she touched Ophelia's hair, stroking it gently. Ophelia's eyes opened, focusing on her mother's face. Mom? I'm here, little star. The endearment seemed to surprise them both. Are you staying? We should return to the palace. Could we come back tomorrow? Kalira looked at Edward, who shrugged. Shop's open if you want it. Please, Mom? All right, tomorrow. After they left, Edward stood in his empty shop, surrounded by prosthetic components and oil stains. For the first time in 3 years, the space didn't feel quite so lonely. The 5th day brought the first real test. The prosthetic was complete, sleek purple metal that matched Ophelia's skin tone, with subtle silver accents that caught the light. Edward had spent all night ensuring every connection was perfect. Ready? He asked Ophelia, who sat on the medical chair he'd borrowed from a clinic. She nodded, jaw set with determination. Kalira stood close, one hand on her daughter's shoulder. Edward activated the neural interface. Ophelia gasped as sensation flooded through the prosthetic, not pain, but awareness. The electromagnetic field generators hummed to life, syncing with her natural biorhythm. How does it feel? Edward asked. Like fizzy water in my bones, tingly but not bad. Can you move the toes? The prosthetic's foot flexed. Ophelia's eyes went wide. I can feel the floor. Not like before, but I can feel it. Good. That's the haptic feedback. Now let's try standing. She stood slowly, Edward on one side, Kalira on the other. The prosthetic held her weight easily. She took a tentative step, then another. Then her confidence crumbled. The moment she remembered she was broken, her biofield fluctuated. The prosthetic's harmonics went out of sync, and she stumbled. Edward caught her before she hit the ground. I can't, she sobbed. I'm not whole anymore. Hey. Edward knelt beside her. Remember what I taught you. Fail faster. You fell, so what? Fall again. Fall 100 times. Each time you learn something. But, no buts. You know what my first crew chief told me? If you're not crashing, you're not pushing hard enough. He helped her stand again. Push harder. Kalira moved to Ophelia's other side. For the first time in a year, she pulled her daughter into a full embrace. You are my daughter, my brilliant, Brave, stubborn daughter, whole or not, you are mine. Ophelia clung to her, tears fizzing against Kalira's shoulder. When she finally pulled back, her expression had changed, determined now, not defeated. Again, she said. This time, when she stood, her biofield remained steady. 1 step, 2, 3. By the 10th step, she was walking almost normally. By the 20th, she was practically bouncing. "Eddie, it works! Mom, look!" She threw herself at them, hugging both simultaneously. In the celebration, caught in the moment of pure joy, Kalira turned to Edward. Their eyes met, both grinning like idiots, and she kissed him. It lasted maybe 2 seconds before they both realized what was happening and jerked apart. Edward's brain seemed to have short-circuited. Kalira's purple skin had darkened to almost indigo. Ophelia looked between them with 6-year-old wisdom. Does this mean Eddie can stay? Before either adult could answer, the shop's window exploded. Glass shards scattered across the workshop floor like deadly stars. A metal cylinder rolled through the broken window, hissing as it released thick smoke. "Get down!" Edward shoved both Kalira and Ophelia behind the workbench as another window shattered. The smoke burned his eyes, some kind of Zephyrian crowd control gas that made his lungs seize. Through the haze, he saw figures in dark suits, not royal guards, something else. They moved with military precision, surrounding the shop. "House Crimson," Kalira hissed, pulling Ophelia closer. "They found us." Edward grabbed a wrench, knowing it was useless against energy weapons but needing something in his hand. "Back door. Move." But the back door exploded inward. More suited figures poured in. Edward stepped forward, ready to fight, when Kalira did something he didn't expect. She stood up, her biofield suddenly visible as a shimmer in the air. "I am Queen Kalira of House Viridian," she announced, her voice carrying despite the chaos. "This is a violation of the Treaty of Houses. Stand down immediately." One figure stepped forward, removing his helmet. Lord Cale Vesper of House Crimson. Edward recognized him from news feeds. Older Zephyrian, scarred face, eyes like chips of ice. "Your Majesty," Vesper said with mock courtesy, "we received reports of dangerous human technology being developed here, merely investigating for public safety, by destroying private property and deploying chemical weapons. Unfortunate necessity." Vesper's gaze found Ophelia, who stood on her new leg, chin raised despite her fear. Interesting device. Surely the council should examine whether such modifications are legal for a potential heir. "The council has no say until the ceremony," Kalira replied. "Perhaps, but accidents happen, especially with untested human technology." Vesper nodded to his soldiers. "Confiscate the device." "Like hell," Edward growled, stepping in front of Ophelia. Vesper smiled coldly. "The human speaks. How novel." He gestured, and 2 soldiers raised their weapons. "Stand aside, mechanic." "No." "Eddie," Kalira warned. "No," Edward repeated. "You want the leg? You go through me." "Acceptable terms." The energy blast hit Edward in the chest, throwing him backward into shelving. Tools crashed around him. Pain exploded through his ribs, stunner setting, not lethal, but it hurt like hell. "Eddie!" Ophelia tried to run to him, but a soldier grabbed her arm. "Don't touch her." Kalira's biofield flared brighter. Several soldiers stepped back. A queen's power wasn't something to test lightly. "Careful, Your Majesty," Vesper said smoothly. "Violence between houses during succession periods carries severe penalties. You wouldn't want to lose your throne over a human and a broken child." Edward forced himself up, tasting blood. "She's not broken, you piece of—" Another stun blast dropped him to his knees. "Stop!" Ophelia's cry pierced the air. Her own biofield suddenly erupted, wild, uncontrolled, but powerful. The prosthetic's electromagnetic amplifiers kicked in, harmonizing with her emotional spike. Every metal tool in the shop began to vibrate. Impossible, Vesper breathed. She shouldn't be able to. The metal cylinder he'd thrown earlier shot across the room, striking him in the head. He stumbled, and chaos erupted. Ophelia's telekinesis, amplified by the prosthetic, sent tools flying like missiles. Soldiers ducked for cover. In the confusion, Edward crawled to his workbench, fingers finding the emergency beacon he'd installed after his first break-in. He slammed it, sending an alert to local security forces. "Weapons down," a new voice commanded. Human security forces poured in. The lower district's police, mostly human and Verdal officers who didn't care about Zephyrian politics. "This is house business," Vesper snarled. "This is my jurisdiction," the human captain replied flatly. "And you just assaulted a human citizen and destroyed private property. Your house status doesn't mean squat down here." Vesper looked ready to argue, then seemed to realize the optics. A noble house attacking a child and a human mechanic. The media would crucify him. "This isn't over," he told Kalira. "The council will hear about this abomination." He gestured to the prosthetic. "No machine can make the imperfect whole." After they left, Edward finally managed to stand, one hand pressed to his ribs. Kalira was beside him immediately, her cool hands checking his injuries with surprising gentleness. "2 cracked ribs," she diagnosed. "Minor burns from the stunner. You're lucky." "Feel super lucky," Edward wheezed. Ophelia hugged him carefully from his other side. "You protected me." "Course I did. That's what family does." The word hung in the air. Family. Kalira's hand stilled on his ribs. "We're not," she began. "Aren't we?" Edward looked between them. "Maybe not by blood or law, but—" "Mom," Ophelia said quietly, "I want to stay here tonight, with Eddie." "That's not appropriate. Please. I don't want to go back to the palace, not yet." Kalira looked at her daughter, then at Edward's damaged shop, then at the man himself, bruised, bleeding, but still standing. "I'll stay too," she decided, "for security purposes." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Security purposes? Shut up and find me bandages for your ribs." They spent the night cleaning glass and fixing what they could. Ophelia fell asleep on the couch again, her prosthetic still attached. She refused to take it off. Kalira and Edward sat on the floor, backs against the workbench, sharing a bottle of earth whiskey Edward had been saving. "Vesper won't stop," Kalira said quietly. "If Ophelia passes the ceremony with the prosthetic, his daughter loses her chance at the throne. So we make sure she passes. It's not that simple. The council could declare the prosthetic invalid, say it's not truly part of her." Edward took a swig of whiskey, wincing as it burned. "Then we make it undeniable. Tomorrow, we train. She needs to do more than walk. She needs to be extraordinary." Kalira looked at him. "Why do you care so much? You really want to know?" She nodded. "Because she reminds me why I loved fixing things in the first place. Not for perfection, but for the joy of making something work again." He met her eyes. "And because you both make me feel less broken too." Kalira was quiet for a long moment. Then she took the whiskey bottle, took a drink, and coughed. "That's terrible." "Yeah, it really is." She laughed softly, then leaned her head against his shoulder. "My husband would have definitely liked you." "Just liked?" He had terrible taste in alcohol, too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Ophelia sleep, her new leg gleaming in the shop's dim light. "5 days," she whispered. "Only 5 days to convince the council that a human-built prosthetic can make my daughter whole." 4, Jack corrected. "Tomorrow's already lost to training." "You mean today?" She pointed to the window where dawn was breaking. "Even better. Nothing like starting training on no sleep with cracked ribs." "You could rest." "Not a chance." Your daughter needs to be ready, and I'll be damned if some scarred asshole with delusions of nobility is going to stop her. Kalira lifted her head to look at him. You're either reckless or brilliant. Jack smirked. Guess I'm both. That's the American way. She smiled, that rare, real smile that transformed her face. Then I suppose we should be human about this. What does that mean? Instead of answering, she kissed him again. This time, neither pulled away. When Ophelia woke an hour later, she found them asleep against the workbench, Kalira's head on Edward's shoulder, his arm around her. The 6-year-old smiled and practiced walking quietly on her new leg, careful not to wake them. Today, she decided, she would start running. Uncle Vesper and the council could stuff their opinions. She had a human dad who built her a rocket leg and a mom who finally hugged her again. The ceremony of inheritance could bring whatever it wanted. She was ready. The morning of the ceremony of inheritance arrived with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the skull. Edward woke to find Ophelia already up, practicing lunges in the workshop's cleared center, her prosthetic whirring softly with each movement. Purple dawnlight filtered through the boards they'd nailed over the broken windows. You're supposed to be resting, he said, sitting up from the makeshift bed they'd made from shipping blankets. Can't sleep. Ophelia executed a perfect pivot, the prosthetic's gyroscope keeping her balanced. Lord Vesper's daughter will be there. She's been training her whole life for this. Yeah, well, she didn't have to learn to walk again first. Edward stood, wincing as his cracked ribs protested. That makes you tougher. Kalira emerged from the shop's tiny bathroom, already dressed in formal robes that somehow looked perfect despite the industrial setting. The transport will arrive in 2 hours. We should prepare. Edward had modified Ophelia's ceremonial robes himself, cutting strategic panels to display the prosthetic rather than hide it. The purple metal gleamed through the fabric like armor, but something was missing. Hold on. He grabbed a can of heat-resistant paint from his workbench. This needs something. Edward, no, Kalira warned. Too late. He was already spraying orange and red flames along the prosthetic side panels, the design flowing from ankle to knee like the cars he used to prep for races. Eddie! Ophelia squealed, but she was grinning. Mom's going to kill you. It's the ceremony of inheritance, Kalira said, her voice dangerously level. Not a, what did you call them? Demolition derby. Those flames add at least 10 horsepower, Edward said with a straight face. Scientific fact. Ophelia twisted to see the design better. It makes me look fast. You are fast. This just advertises it. Kalira pinched the bridge of her nose. The council will think we're mocking tradition. Good. Their tradition says broken kids should hide. We're saying she's got a rocket leg and they can deal with it. Mother and daughter locked eyes. Something passed between them, a whole conversation in a glance. Then Kalira's shoulders relaxed. The flames stay, she decided. But if the council objects, we blame the human, Edward and Ophelia said in unison. The transport that arrived wasn't the subtle vehicle Edward expected. It was a floating platform of polished metal and deliberately visible energy fields designed to be seen. The pilot, a stern-faced Zephyrian with military bearing, looked at Edward's presence with obvious disapproval. Humans are not permitted. He's my emotional support mechanic, Ophelia said, grabbing Edward's hand. Very important for my performance anxiety. The pilot looked to Kalira, who shrugged. She has spoken. They flew over the city's tiers, from the grimy lower districts where species mixed freely, through the middle zones of commerce and trade, up to the floating platforms of the nobility. The Great Hall sat at the apex, not crystal or gleaming as Edward had expected, but carved from single massive stone that predated spaceflight. It was deliberately primitive, a reminder of what Zephyrians were before they reached the stars. Nervous? Edward asked Ophelia quietly. Terrified. Good. Use it. Fear means you care. Caring means you'll fight. The platform descended into a courtyard already packed with representatives from the houses. A sea of purple faces in elaborate robes turned to watch their arrival. Whispers rippled through the crowd, not about Kalira or even Ophelia initially, but about the human mechanic who dared attend such a ceremony. Lord Vesper stood near the entrance, his scarred face arranged in a pleasant smile that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him, a girl perhaps 2 years older than Ophelia stood in robes that probably cost more than Edward's entire shop. She had her father's sharp features, but her mother's softer eyes. Lady Tyma, Vesper's daughter and Ophelia's competition. Your Majesty, Vesper said smoothly, I see you've brought your pet. I've brought my daughter's physician, Kalira replied. Her tone could have frozen nitrogen, as is permitted for any heir with medical requirements. Of course. And such interesting medical treatments. His gaze fixed on the flame-decorated prosthetic visible through Ophelia's robes. How festive. We like to party, Edward said flatly. Vesper's eye twitched. The human speaks. In the Great Hall, how unprecedented. Lots of that going around, Edward replied. Thema stepped forward, ignoring the adult tension. I like your leg, she told Ophelia directly. The flames are cool. Ophelia blinked, surprised. Thanks, your robes are pretty. My dad made me wear them. They're itchy. Thyma lowered her voice conspiratorially. Is it true you can fly with that thing? Not yet, but Eddie, my dad, he's working on rocket boots. Wicked. Vesper's hand landed on his daughter's shoulder, pulling her back. The ceremony begins soon. We should take our positions. Inside the Great Hall, Edward had to admit the Zephyrians knew how to build for drama. The space was carved from that single stone, but the acoustics were perfect. Every whisper carried. Tiers of seats rose in circles around a central platform where a path of polished metal led to an altar. Upon it sat the crown of inheritance, a circlet of metal that seemed to shift between purple and silver depending on the angle. The rules were simple, as Kalira had explained them. The heir must walk the ceremonial path, exactly 100 meters, without assistance. Then lift the crown with telekinesis alone, hold it aloft while reciting the Oath of Protection. Physical contact with the crown before the oath was complete meant failure. Remember, Edward whispered to Ophelia as they waited for the ceremony to begin, the prosthetics harmonics are calibrated to your emotional baseline. Stay calm, trust the tech, trust yourself. What if I fall? Then you get up. That's what we do. The High Priestess entered, ancient even by Zephyrian standards, her purple skin so dark it was nearly black, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd outlived several dynasties. She raised one hand and the hall fell silent. We gather to witness the selection of heir, she intoned, her voice carrying despite its thinness. 2 candidates present themselves, Lady Tyma of House Crimson, Princess Ophelia of House Viridian. Who stands first? Tyma stepped forward. I do. She walked the path with practiced grace, each step measured and perfect. When she reached the altar, her biofield flared, controlled, precise. The crown rose smoothly, hovering at exactly the prescribed height as she recited the oath in flawless High Zephyrian. When she finished, she set the crown down gently and bowed. Applause filled the hall. Vesper's smile was triumphant. Princess Ophelia, the High Priestess called, your turn. Ophelia moved to the start of the path. The hall went quiet, not the respectful silence Thyma had received, but the anticipatory hush of people expecting disaster, every eye fixed on the prosthetic with its painted flames. She took her first step. The mechanical leg moved smoothly, Edward's gyroscopic system keeping her balanced. Another step, Another. The crowd began to murmur, surprised that she could walk at all. Then, at exactly the halfway point, everything went wrong. The prosthetic seized mid-step. Ophelia's eyes went wide as the leg locked completely, sending her crashing to the polished floor. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot. "No!" Kalira started forward, but the High Priestess raised a hand. "The heir must complete the path alone. No assistance is permitted." Edward was already moving, his mind racing through diagnostic possibilities. EMP had to be. The prosthetic had triple redundancy. Nothing else could cause total system failure. His eyes swept the crowd and found Vesper, whose expression of concern was undermined by the satisfaction in his eyes. "That bastard," Edward muttered, then louder. "Your Holiness, I request examination of the prosthetic for sabotage." "Silence, human," Vesper stood. "You dare interrupt? I dare a lot of things." Edward stepped into the ceremonial circle, technically violating about 17 sacred laws. Someone deployed an EMP. That's the only way to kill all 3 power systems simultaneously. "You have no proof," Vesper said. "Don't need it. I've got this." Edward pulled his toolkit from his jacket, kneeling beside Ophelia, who was trying not to cry. "Hey, kiddo. Remember what I taught you about system failures? Always have redundancy," she whispered. "That's my girl." He popped open the prosthetic's access panel, speaking louder so the entire hall could hear. "You know what your problem is, all of you? You think perfection means never failing." He pulled out tools, hands working from memory while he talked. "On Earth, we've got a different word for things that never fail. We call them dead. Life is breaking and rebuilding, falling and getting up. This kid, your princess, crawled through sewage pipes for 3 months just to learn. That's not imperfection." The secondary power coupling was fried. He bypassed it, rerouting through the tertiary system. She lost her leg, and instead of giving up, she learned to walk again. She fell down every day for weeks, got up every time. That's not weakness. The prosthetic hummed back to life, but barely, running on emergency power only. She stood up to her own family, her entire culture, everyone who told her she was broken. That's not deficiency. He helped Ophelia stand. The prosthetic held, but barely. That's unstoppable will, and if you can't see that, maybe you need new eyes, not a new heir. The hall erupted in angry voices, some calling for Edward's arrest, others actually seeming to consider his words. Through it all, Ophelia stood on shaking legs, the prosthetic sparking occasionally but holding her weight. "I can finish," she told him quietly. "I know you can, but you don't have to do it alone." He pulled one last component from his kit, a power cell he'd been saving, small enough to hide, powerful enough to run the leg for hours. 4th redundancy. Always have one more backup than you think you need. He installed it in seconds. The prosthetic purred back to full function, the flames on its side seeming to glow in the hall's dramatic lighting. "The human has interfered," Vesper shouted. "The trial is invalid." "The human has repaired sabotage," Kalira said, standing as well. "I demand investigation of the EMP signature. Such devices leave traceable residue." The High Priestess raised both hands for silence. When she got it, she spoke directly to Ophelia. "Child, can you continue?" Ophelia nodded, but when she took her next step, something had changed. Her biofield, normally a faint shimmer, suddenly flared bright enough to see clearly. It wasn't the prosthetic's amplification. Edward could see the readings were normal. This was all her. She walked the remaining 50 meters without wobbling once. When she reached the altar, she didn't immediately reach for the crown with her telekinesis. Instead, she turned to face the assembly. "I am imperfect," she said, her young voice carrying clearly. "I will always be imperfect. This leg is not flesh. It's metal and circuits and really cool flames that my dad painted even though Mom said not to. A few nervous chuckles from the crowd. But I'm stronger for it. I've learned things you can't know without falling. I've found family in places you'd never look. I've been rebuilt by love, not law. Her biofield pulsed brighter. The crown began to rise, but so did every other piece of metal in the room. Ceremonial armor lifted off bodies. Decorative weapons pulled from walls. Even Lord Vesper's medallion of office tried to strangle him until he unclasped it. If you need a perfect ruler, Ophelia continued, the crown now hovering at the correct height while chaos reigned around her, then choose Taima. She's never failed because she's never had to fight. But if you want a ruler who understands that strength comes from rebuilding, not from never breaking. She began the oath of protection, speaking each word with deliberate precision while maintaining her telekinetic hold on what seemed like half the metal in the building. Edward noticed Taima watching with something like awe, and maybe envy. When the last word of the oath left her lips, Ophelia didn't just set the crown down. She let everything drop at once. The crash was tremendous, metal clanging against stone in a cacophony that made everyone cover their ears. In the silence that followed, the High Priestess spoke. The child has demonstrated power beyond any heir in generations. She paused, ancient eyes studying Ophelia. The law speaks of bodily perfection, but perhaps we have misunderstood. Perhaps the perfection required is not of body, but of spirit, the ability to transform suffering into strength. This is outrageous. Vesper stepped forward. Centuries of tradition. Lord Vesper, the High Priestess interrupted, the residue scanner indicates EMP discharge from your location. The deployment of such devices during a sacred ceremony is treason. Guards moved toward Vesper, who backed away. This isn't over. The Council will review your crimes, Kalira said coldly, starting with the attempted murder of a 6-year-old child. As guards led Vesper away, Taima broke from her mother's side and ran to Ophelia. That was amazing. Can you teach me to do that? The metal thing, not the losing a leg thing. Maybe, Ophelia said, suddenly shy. If you teach me that perfect walking thing. Edward felt a hand on his shoulder. Kalira stood beside him, watching their daughter make her first real friend. You violated 17 sacred laws, she murmured. Only 17. I was going for an even 20. The council could still override the selection. They won't. Edward nodded toward the crowd, where younger Zephyrians were clustering around Ophelia, asking about the prosthetic, touching the painted flames. Look at them. She's not just their heir, she's their hero, the broken kid who refused to stay broken. That evening, after the feast and speeches and political maneuvering, Kalira found Edward in his shop. He was already working on improvements to the prosthetic, sketching designs for the rocket boots he'd promised. You could have a palace workshop, she said, sitting on his workbench. State-of-the-art equipment, assistants. Pass. I like my shop. It's got character and oil stains and that one wrench that you have to hit things with to make them work. Then I'll have to visit often for Ophelia's maintenance appointments. Just for that? She moved closer. What else would bring a queen to a human mechanics shop? Oh, I don't know. Maybe this? He pulled out a small device from his drawer, a tiny prosthetic, perfectly crafted but miniature. Kalira stared at it. What? Figure any kid of ours might need adaptive tech. Being half human, half Zephyrian and all. Might as well be prepared. Edward Ramirez, are you actually proposing to me with a tiny prosthetic leg? Too weird? I can get a ring. Humans do rings, but I thought... She kissed him, which seemed like a yes. The door burst open. Ophelia stood there, still in her ceremonial robes, but with grease already on her face from something. Finally, does this mean I can call you Dad now? Edward knelt down to her level. "You could have called me that months ago, kiddo." She launched herself at him, then pulled Kalira into the hug. They stood there, a strange family in a dirty shop, a human mechanic, a Zephyrian queen, and a 6-year-old with a flame-painted prosthetic who'd just inherited a throne. "So," Ophelia said, pulling back, "about those rocket boots." "Tomorrow," Kalira said firmly. "Tonight, we're just family." "But rockets, Mom, rockets!" Edward grinned. "I'm with the kid. Rockets make everything better." Kalira looked between them, her daughter and this impossible human who'd rebuilt both their lives, and laughed. Real laughter, the kind she hadn't felt in years. "Fine, but only small rockets." "Deal," Edward and Ophelia said together. Outside, the city lights of Verdania Prime glowed in tears from ground to sky, a reminder of all the boundaries they'd crossed. But inside the shop, surrounded by tools and engine parts and the smell of motor oil, those boundaries didn't matter. They were home.